we covered the topic of being spiritual, of cultivating that attribute within our character. And I think in sequence of that, it's a appropriate consideration this morning where we're going to start on what I've called in the lesson, the cultivating the attitude of being worshipful. And God is a spirit. We connect with him in a variety of ways, including through worship. So I'm going to start by asking you a question, and I hope I'll get responses from you. What is worship? Okay, David.
It's the expression of adoration and praise, an exalted expression of adoration and praise. So we think about worship toward God.
Okay. Adoration and praise. Other ideas that people have? What is worship?
Paying homage to someone or something that we hold greater than ourselves.
Okay. So it's something that you express toward someone, or something above you, greater than you. Okay.
There's a note in the definition, the submission of all of our nature to God.
Okay. Submission, I think, is definitely in there. If you look at the context of the use of this word, which appears frequently in the scriptures. Let me ask you more specific. Is worship confined to what happens in the four walls of this rented space?
No.
It's an internal and external thing.
Yeah.
It's also an adoration which goes much higher than what we do here. It's how we live our lives, how we adore him, and we want our lives to bring honor to his name.
Yeah. Okay, so what happens here is important, but it's not all encompassing of what is contained within the idea of worship. And that's why I think it's appropriate to talk about this and how we cultivate what we're going to describe as worshipfulness, or these attitudes associated with worship, because worship is something that we should be engaged in, I would say, 7 days a week. It takes different forms, and we'll talk about that. I was struck by a note that Vine includes in his laying out the various words that are translated worship in the New Testament. And he has this note. I'm going to ask you if you agree with it. But he said, worship of God is nowhere defined in Scripture, he says. A consideration of the above verb shows that it is not confined to praise. Broadly, it may be regarded as the direct acknowledgement to God of his nature, attributes, ways, and claims, whether by the outgoing of the heart in praise and thanksgiving, or by deed done and such acknowledgement. That's a pretty explicit statement that he says there. We see many forms. I didn't pause to ask if you agree with what Vine said there. But. Okay.
Well, I think that one way to maybe make it easier to think about is to understand that the word worship is not necessarily a religious word. It's not confined to the religious space. As I look at the note here, it says many Greek words. Proskuneo, literally to kiss toward, is most common. Think of the times you've seen in the movies when someone is made to kiss a signet ring, whether it's of a duke or of a pope or of an emperor or somebody like this. This is also worship. This is putting oneself in a subservient position and acknowledging that person's or being's authority over you. And so when we recognize that that is a thing that happens outside of religious spaces and ideas, then maybe it's easier to understand what it means to worship God practically. How do we translate we go from kissing the ducal signet ring to kissing towards God in some way? Maybe we can find better words for that on our own. But.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, that specific word, proskuneo, is the most frequent word in the Greek that's translated worship in the New Testament, actually. And an example of that is in Matthew chapter 2, which I listed there. And in the context of Matthew chapter 2, we had these magi, as they were called, who came in search of the Christ child, right, following the star. And in verse 2, it says that where he is, who has been born King of the Jews, for we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. That's that proskuneo word. And it's used again in verse 11, right, when they actually find the child. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. After coming into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell to the ground and worshiped him. What do you think they did? What were they doing? Right? They were prostrating themselves. They were putting themselves physically and emotionally and intellectually in a position of submission and adoration to an infant, right? In recognition of who that infant was and who he would become and what he would do. And the scriptures call that worship. So their attitude is exemplary for us, I would say. I mean, we don't, have statues that we do this to, right? That's a different kind of thing that we would call idolatry. But nevertheless, how do we cultivate the attitude that motivated these magi to travel some great distance? I don't know how, it could have been hundreds of miles, so that they could come and worship this child. So I, in my own words, we're talking about an attitude we're trying to cultivate in ourselves. I called it, here in my words, a life posture toward God that we cultivate and express through thought and attitude and feeling and action, that we express gratitude, devotion, submission, and praise to God. And there are a whole variety of ways, I think, in life, 7 days a week, that we should do that. And today we have an expression of that in our formal worship, collective worship together. In Romans 12 in verse 1, a different word is used, but the idea is this: to serve and to render religious service or homage, and those ideas have also been expressed here. So how do we cultivate what I've called this worshipfulness in our character, that attitudes that motivate and fuel and guide us in expressing ourselves in this way toward God? And the first point that I make here is that we need to acknowledge his worthiness for our worship. And if somebody could maybe look at or read for us Psalm 99 and verses 1 through 5.
Todd, before we get there, back at Romans 12, verse 1, the very end of that, let me read the whole. It says, "Beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service." Now that reasonable, in this particular thing, how do you describe what would be reasonable?
Yeah. Other translations use, I think, the word spiritual. Spiritual service. So this is, we would understand particularly in the New Covenant, that this is this is a service that we offer to God, not because he needs us to do something for him, right? That it is a way in which we, I'd say, connect ourselves and develop and build relationship with God by offering this spiritual.
I say that it's, you put forth a sincere effort to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, right, the sincerity of it. So, yeah.
Probably the idea of reasonable, not as opposed to unreasonable, but as opposed to without reason, or without using the mind. And it's a reasonable service would be a service of the mind.
Yeah.
Perhaps that.
Okay. So Psalm 99 is one of many passages of the Psalms, and I think the Psalms in general are a good source for us to reflect on, to cultivate these attitudes toward God. But in Psalm 99, the Lord reigns, let the prophets tremble, or the peoples tremble, pardon me. He is enthroned above the cherubim, let the earth shake. The Lord is great in Zion, and he is exalted above all the peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is he. The strength of the king loves justice. You have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his footstool. He is holy. So you can see many aspects that we need to acknowledge in terms of God's greatness that should motivate our worship. And where do we worship God? At his footstool, right? We have to cultivate the sense of humility that allows us to submit ourselves at his footstool. That's the proper position of worship of God. We're putting ourselves in a position in relation to him, not as his equal or his peer, but as his subject. And that's our position at his footstool. In Acts chapter 17, if you just want to look there briefly, you may recall that in that passage that Paul is in Athens and he's reflecting upon what he's observed there and is commenting on their religiousness, all these temples and these representations that they worship. What points in that text relate to how Paul is describing the true worship of the true God is done, and how we are to participate in that?
Say that again.
Well, what does Paul reveal about our service to God and our worship of God? He's contrasting it with these idols and this idol worship in Athens. What points is Paul elevating
Just about
here?
everything.
Pardon? Neil?
He made the worlds, which their idols were just partial here and there sort of thing.
Yeah.
God worship with men's hands, in verse 25.
Yeah.
One blood, made man.
Right.
26. And the nation, verse 27, ought to seek him.
Yeah. He makes this point in that context that he doesn't dwell in temples that are made with hands, and he makes this point that as though he needs something from us, right? He's not dependent upon us, we're dependent upon him. Okay? That's an important recognition to have. Yeah.
Great contrast to that. You go to a museum and you see an idol, an old carved idol or whatever that's sitting in a museum, and it's just a curiosity. 1,000 years ago, people were living and dying in front of that thing.
Yeah.
But it only has value according to what value was put in it. God is still the same. He's still the creator, the judge, the sustainer of the world.
Yeah.
Whether anybody believes it or not.
Yeah. Yeah, on that point, I could have asked more specific questions here, but for example, in verses 26 and 27, Paul is making this point that God has determined our bounds and our boundaries and limitations, right? He made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation. It says further that they would seek God, if perhaps they might grope or feel for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. To me, this is kind of the heart of the point that Paul is making here, is that, and what I'm trying to connect to this point, that is worship is a way in which we seek God personally, that we seek after and feel after God, that we are, through worship, building a relationship with God, a relationship that is properly defined and bounded and scoped. We recognize that we're at his footstool and we owe him our homage.
They had so many gods that they were trying to worship. There was a God for every single thing. And today, in the modern religion, we see people praying to saints who cover various areas of their life. So that kind of got carried on into the modern religion today. When Paul's saying, this God who created the earth and set those boundaries covers everything. We don't need any saints, or we don't need any gods, or anything to pray to other than that one God.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. It's related to this, of course, but I'm focusing here on this next point. I mean, we need to acknowledge his worthiness, and we could talk about that at great length. But that acknowledgement is to prompt certain reactions within us that prepare us to worship him. And I've just pointed out two of them here. They should create within us a sense of awe and reverence for him. And that's fundamental to us being worshipful, of being prepared to worship God always. Okay? So there are many places we could go to this, and I've gone here now to Psalm 95. It's just one example of this. Oh, come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving. Let us shout joyfully to him with psalms. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods, in whose hand are the depths of the earth. The peaks of the mountains are his also. The sea is his, for it was he who made it, and his hands formed the dry land. That's why I think the Psalms are a really good place to go, right? To appreciate, what God is and what that is to spark within us, within our minds and within our heart and our feelings, awe and reverence. Okay. Back on Romans 12 and 1, maybe we didn't cover all that sufficiently when Gary raised this point, but this acknowledgement and these inner attitudes toward God are to prompt us to do many things, including influence how we organize, if you will, our life. And Romans 12, I think, gets to this point very concisely in Romans 12 and verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship, the New American Standard says. Do we present our bodies a living and holy sacrifice acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship? So, how is it that we present our bodies a living and holy sacrifice? Pardon?
Doing his will for a starter.
Okay.
It's a matter of dedicating everything that we are to him. Think about a sacrifice, right? And especially the idea of killing a sacrifice, putting it on the altar, this animal dies, gives its life. We're supposed to be living sacrifices. So it's that complete dedication, but we're not killing ourselves. We're completely living and dedicating ourselves and everything that we are to Him.
You know, it is a dedication. I mean, in a sense. And it may be the case that, the contrast is between the animal sacrifices that, but this idea of living, I think, is an interesting idea here that, what is it? Because the way we live, we show our dedication, to God. It's living. Dead animals were not offered to God, I would submit to you, right? The people did not bring a dead animal to the temple. That animal was alive. Okay? And I think the contrast maybe here is that we were dead in our trespasses and sins. Now we are alive. We're a proper sacrifice to God now in our living form, because we have been made alive by Him.
Yeah, our next verse here is going to be in John 4, and it ties in so perfectly, I think, because this is where Jesus is talking to the woman at the well and says, starting in verse 23, "But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth." There's an application that's often made here to say that we must worship Him the correct way, i.e. in the truth, and with the right attitude, i.e. in spirit. That argument is not false, I don't think, but it's not the full argument that's being made. God is spirit, not physical. To perform a physical act of worship, such as, going back to the image before, kissing a ring, or making a bow, or going prostrate before someone, that's something you can do whether your heart's in it or not. So I can physically show obeisance or reverence or worship, as we say, but if my heart's not in it, is that going to be acceptable to God? Not at all. We need to worship in spirit as well. We need to understand that God is due this worship. And I think this is the point that you've been driving at the whole time. We need to understand that this isn't just something we have to do. This is something we should do. This is something we should want to do. Because God is great. God has created us. God has done all these wonderful things.
Yeah, that I put it, heart and mind. This is, when we think about what it is to worship God in spirit and in truth, that when we come to God, we bring Him not only our mind and our thoughts and our will, we also bring Him our feelings. This sometimes makes people uncomfortable to stress this point. But if our worship is not offered in a heartfelt way, if there's not deep feeling there, there's something important missing. And that's why is poetry powerful? Because poetry evokes emotion. And that's why, going to the Psalm again, the Psalms are so much about worship. There are so many of them that were used in worship by the Jewish people, because of not only the ideas they contained, but also the feelings and emotions they helped people develop and focus. Okay? So, this discourse that happens between this woman in Samaria and Jesus, very interesting. He says, it's not going to be about the place, this worship. It's going to be about the people and what they do and their heart and mind and how they devote themselves to God through worship. So it's bringing heart and mind together. I said aligning those, and that's something that we do need to reflect on, because where there's a difference between what we know and what we feel. We're probably not maybe worshiping as we should. Yeah.
Combining verses 1 and 2 in Romans 12, I have a note here. It says, if I can see it, because God wants only what is best for us, and because he gave his son to make our new lives possible, we should joyfully give ourselves to living sacrifice for his service.
Mhm.
That's, to me, that says it all right there
Yeah.
in one sentence.
Yeah, that's a good note. It's what's the motivation for us? Well, he says in the very first part of the first verse, by the mercies of God. I mean, that's what that draws us to worship when we think what he's done for us and how the well of mercy that he provides to us, that should evoke the emotional and intellectual basis of our worship.
And the fact that this translation here says he wants the best for us.
Yeah.
I don't think we always think about, God's gonna give me the best, yeah, but in a spiritual way.
Yeah.
He's not talking about material things, but in a very positive spiritual way.
Yeah.
He wants the best for us.
Yeah, and this is, in wrapping this up, this idea of seeking him and seeking him through worship, this familiar passage from Hebrews chapter 11, that we go to Hebrews chapter 11 to talk about faith, but the Hebrew writer makes this point, and without faith it is impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. And this idea of seeking, why do we seek God? Because God does have our best interests, and he wants to reward, and that should motivate our position and our posture with regard to him. And the final passage here, back in the Psalm 70, and I think we started a little bit on this point, but in Psalm 70 and verse 4, okay. Let all who seek you, the same idea of seeking God that we see connected with worship, one way we do this. Let all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. And let those who love your salvation say continually, let God be magnified. There is a very important, I would say, celebratory nature to worship. I mean, we are celebrating, we are seeking, but we're also celebrating and expressing ourselves to God with thanksgiving for what he has done for us, the profoundness of what he has done for us. Okay. Any other points about this?
But it does, as you pointed out, it starts with recognizing who he is in relation to us. I'm reminded of when Peter came to Cornelius' house, and Cornelius fell down to worship Peter, and Peter says, stand up, I myself am also a man.
Mm-hmm.
You don't worship your peers. You offer this to the one who is infinitely above you, who made you, and celebrating, like you said, his ability to deliver us, his love for us, what he's done for us. All that's directed toward him, not toward something less than what he is.
Right. And it's just, I was motivated to include this attitude, and I kind of, this worshipfulness is something that we should be cultivating continually within ourselves, and not something we just start thinking about when we're ironing our clothes on Sunday morning. That's not what God is seeking for us. We need to find ways to worship every day. Every day. Okay. Any final things on that? Yeah, Neil?
The idea of a living sacrifice, Samuel kind of fulfills that idea, that his mother dedicated him to God when he was a child, when he was weaned, he said, and he spent the rest of his life as a prophet and priest and so on.
Right, right. Anything else? Yeah.
So, in Exodus chapter 20, when it mentions worshiping God and only worshiping God, that's in the bowing down and worshiping Him subservient kind of nature. And if we stretch that out, so to say, for our day-to-day lives, living a living sacrifice and being worshipful in all of our actions, and all of our actions would be subservient to Him. So our wants and our desires, whatever they may be, need to be underneath that authority.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I think so. I mean, it's definitely the case that, if you cultivate this attitude, then you're going to place God's will for you above your own will. But that begins with cultivating these ideas and these, I'm going to say, feelings, these emotions that we've been talking about that fuel that, right? I mean, it's just do it. Could be an approach, but the reason why somebody's not doing it probably has some other things that precede that, right? Like they don't have the faith, they don't have the respect or the sense of awe and reverence for God. That's where it begins. So when we're having trouble, or we observe people are having trouble submitting to God, it has, things that precede, problems that precede that lead to that. Okay. Also, in our 12 minutes remaining, we'll talk about this next character trait of being good. We heard this a lot from maybe our mother and our father growing up. Be good. And maybe we can treat this kind of in a somewhat kind of trivial or superficial way. And there's actually a lot here, I think. How do we cultivate goodness? Okay. This is the word from Galatians chapter 5, and it's easy to kind of pass over a word like this because we probably use this word frequently in our just day-to-day. But in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 22, when Paul is listing out, fruits of the Spirit, said, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. Well, what is goodness? And how do we build it? So, this word, yeah.
In Romans 5th chapter, verse 6, 7 or so, for when we were still without strength, at due time Christ died for the ungodly. For scarcely for a righteous man will one die, yet perhaps for a good man someone would even dare to die. God demonstrated His own love towards us while we were yet sinners. We're still sinners. Christ died for us. There's a contrast between a good man and a righteous man there.
Yeah.
And the good man is better than the righteous man in this sense. We think of good as just good in general, but righteous specifically good. The righteous man is the individual who will do what is right, no more, no less. The good man is the man who will go beyond what is right to do what is good, beneficial.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Neil.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you were, someone went to the grocery store, they had hungry children, they have a certain amount of money, and the righteous man will sell them the groceries that they need, or the groceries that they can pay for. He won't cheat them, but he won't go beyond that. The good man will give more because he sees the need. The Good Samaritan is a good example of a good man.
Yeah, those are all very good points. That there should be a complementary nature between being righteous and being good, of course. And you're keying in on the point I think to be stressed here, and just looking at the definition: good in character and constitution, beneficial in effect. And we've heard probably variations on this idea. If you're only good for yourself, you're probably not much good. Right? It's kind of, that's the idea of, like, you need to be beneficial in effect. You need to be good for more than just yourself. that is like good for other people. That's, I think, what part of what you were getting at there. So it includes being moral, being upright, being righteous. And it, I think, focuses in on the fact that you're good for others. I mean, you're a source of goodness. And I see that being one of the reasons why Paul uses goodness as one of the fruits of the Spirit that we are to cultivate. The first point I said, okay, if we're trying to cultivate, if we're trying to be gooder, in our character, what do we do? Well, I think it would be appropriate to look to the ultimate example of goodness, and that's our God. God is good. We have songs that stress this point. In fact, one song in particular, and we won't maybe look at all these passages, you can look at them. But in Psalm 107 and verse 1, oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. That's a very simple expression. God is good, but there's a lot in that. And when we consider all that we derive, all that we benefit from, this idea of being beneficial in effect from God. Jesus makes this point about, only God is good, right? And the point that he's making there is that he is the ultimate perfect embodiment of this trait. Gary?
You compare God to a tree, and that tree bears fruit. Who gets the fruit? We do.
Yeah.
He didn't bear it for himself. In the same way, that's what we're to bear fruits for him.
Yeah.
And goodness and all these adjectives that it gives here. And I see that as a great example that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. Good. Back in Romans 12, I was awfully stuck on this passage and these two traits, but back in Romans chapter 12, focusing in again on verse 2, he talks about our living in holy sacrifice in verse 1, and then in verse 2, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Right? That is, that which prompts us to be beneficial in effect. Right? Beneficial in effect. It's God's will that we do that. And even further, this idea in Romans 12, maybe, Paul was kind of stuck on this idea here in Romans chapter 12, in verse 9, look what he says, let love be without hypocrisy, abhor what is evil, cling to what is good. And this idea of cling, if you look at the Greek word, it means be glued to it. Have you ever been using super glue and not been as careful as you should have been and ended up in this position? Yeah. So that's the idea, to cling to it. That is, be glued to this trait. That, that it sticks to you. Okay? That in John 3, how do you become a gooder person? How do we cultivate goodness? Is a good question. I think John 3 gets to this point in 11. It says, beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. What is he asking or directing us to do?
But take what he's given us and to bear fruit. That's why he's given us so many good things.
Yeah.
He's given us the best, but we got to do something with it.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know. That's what it says.
Yeah. But Brian.
I think more than any other word, or as much as any other word, good is defined by its opposite to some great extent, because even an atheist will say, how can you believe there's a God when there's so much evil in the world? well, how can you not believe in God when there's so much good in the world? Or when you can actually define evil and actually use that term to say this is a bad thing, you're borrowing that idea from the fact that there is something that should be its opposite, that should be good.
Yeah.
And even the original sin of taking the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we can see something and see this is wrong and this is right. And that if we're going to abhor evil, then that there's some basic level of knowledge that everybody has that, killing puppies is a bad thing, right? Everybody acknowledges that no matter what. And so we see that we can define an evil thing so easily. And because of that, there has to be some absolute moral good that allows us to see that.
Yeah. And the word I was keying in here on this passage too, but consistent with the point you're making, Brian, is that we're to imitate this. And if you look at the Greek word of this, imitate, you're mimicking something. I mean, we're surrounded by people, and we see it every day. I mean, we sometimes, our eye gets attracted to, oh, that was a terrible thing that person did. But we should really make an effort to focus in on good things that we see around us and say, I should be imitating that. I should be doing just like that. Yeah.
And if we lack for an example, we can go back to Psalm 107 and realize that he doesn't just say God is good and leave it at that. He gives us examples.
Yeah.
Some folks wandered in desert wastes, finding no way to a city to dwell in, hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted within them. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress.
Yeah.
And he goes on and describes this in a number of other circumstances. Some were lost in their sins. Some were foolish. Some did this and suffered because of their wickedness. But in every case, they cried to the Lord in their distress, and he delivered them.
Mm-hmm.
How can we imitate that? If we see a need, meet the need.
Right.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah. Good point. The next we're just about to get this one done. I said, cultivate a passion for goodness. So you can imitate it, you can model the behavior and the actions that you see in others, and that's a good thing. But then we also need to cultivate, our own feelings and our excitement and passion for doing good, and what that involves. And in 1 Peter chapter 3, and it's very interesting because 1 Peter, he's so focused on the persecution that these Christians were enduring and would be enduring. And then he says, who is there to harm you? He says, he's trying to give them some perspective. Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? Rhetorical question. He's putting in perspective. You're experiencing and will experiencing persecution. He wants them to focus on you be zealous for doing good, being beneficial in effect. And so we imitate, we cultivate a passion for goodness, and then we practice it. We do it. We do good. And Galatians 6 and 10, again, a passage that we're all familiar with. Galatians 6. So then, while we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. And harkening back to Brian's point, part of doing good is avoiding what is evil. Don't be harmful, in effect. But this idea of goodness is, I would say, is like additive, right? Don't harm, but more than that, be beneficial, in effect. Do good. Bring good things, okay? Avoid harm, add good. Okay, we're a minute over. But anybody have another point, Neil?
Your question there, how do we cultivate goodness? There's an expression, fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
And that's the way we learn everything. We practice until we get it right.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you know, there are reasons to object to that idea. We're not putting on airs, we're not pretending, but sometimes you just have to, well, I'm gonna do this, and that part of doing it, right,
But part of it, you know.
builds that within you, yeah.
You do it, it talks about the renewing of your mind, is a thought. In you direct, your thoughts may be, you know, like a normal person
Yeah.
has. But if you force yourself to think good,
Yeah.
after a while, it becomes natural.
Yeah.
Make it till you make it.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes we maybe overthink, like, well, I need to think a lot more about goodness. Yeah, you do, but maybe just do good, and you'll find that, well, maybe that'll prompt you to start thinking more about good, right? So sometimes just do it. It does work. Okay, thanks for your participation.